Howdy, howdy. I'm Toby Gant. Welcome back to Gant's Garage. TJ is out working today. I'm in the garage working on a Turbo 400. I thought I would just go over a couple of things. I'm not going to get into taking it apart and putting everything together. There's bunch of stuff out there that shows you how to do that, and diagrams where thrust washers go and stuff. We're building something with a reverse manual valve body with a trans brake, putting a good drum and good clutches and a good sprag assembly in it. And I'm just going to show you some of the tricks to watch out for when you're doing something like this, which is easily done at home. And this thing will handle 800 to 1,000 horsepower. And it's something that you guys, with these Turbo 400s, you do them a couple of times and get a little bit of knowledge behind you on them, and there's no reason why you can't maintenance this thing and take care of it yourself and know what to do and what not to do. You know, we're all racers. We're all trying to do as much as we can to keep our costs down and try and enjoy ourselves. So let me look here. First of all, I'm going to show you the case and one of the modifications to do while you got the case apart and cleaned up. This one, of course, has the bell housing cut off of it. It's got an aftermarket bell housing. It's pretty easy to, nothing fancy. Some guys will use a reciprocating saw, drill a hole in it, and start with a reciprocating saw. Some of us use cutoff wheels. Main thing is to leave your area right here where your pan rail. Just come around here. There's where your pump slides in, the little bevel, and just stay behind that bevel. I cut them pretty much even with that bevel, and then come back with a flapper disc and cut them down. And then on the edge here with the pan rail, I roll it up like this on the pan rail. Trim the pan rail down just a touch, but don't get too crazy with it where you're into the bolt hose and stuff, because then it will try to leak there. If you need more clearance here, I mill the bell housing. I cut the bell housing and grind the bell housing to fit the case right here. The bell housings are usually real freaking thick and got plenty of meat in them, and they're rough cut. You'll see there's only a few machine areas in that bell housing when you get them, and the rest of it is rough. So there's plenty of meat here to trim and get this thing to fit correctly. And you want to fit it once you get your pump in and stuff, and then you want to go ahead and slide it on here. And also, most of the time, the deep aluminum pans or the aluminum pans, you'll have to do a little trimming on them to fit to the bell housing. Nothing's perfect right out of the box, of course. But case-wise, clean everything up, flat sand it. I hit this bore right here with a Scotch-Brite. This is for the low reverse band. Hit it with Scotch-Brite just a touch, and then just flat sand it after you get everything clean. The one area that we need to look at is the rear. If you can see that, there's a rear bushing in there. And what we want to do, maybe I just show. That rear bushing normally sits flush in the back of that case right here, flush with the edge of this case. And there's a washer that goes down, a big steel washer tab that goes down. Then there's a brass washer that goes in the back of the planetary where the output shaft goes in, like this here. we're going to get rid of this bearing in this thrust washer and put a bearing in the back of it. Okay? So to do that, what we need is something to center the bearing back there. Is you just take that bushing back here. When you knock your new bushing in it, you just want to go ahead and leave it out about 60 thousandths, 70 thousandths. And that centers your bearing, because it fits perfect right there on the inside of that bearing. So that holds the bearing and centers the bearing back there. And then when you want to that's how you set your output shaft in play as well. And you use a shim kit. These are nothing but a Turbo 350 pump stator bearing. Very easy to find. The shim kits are very easy to find, and it's relatively cheap. I think it's $15 for the shim kit and the bearing. And the shim kit will have a bunch of shims with it. And you can also use this shim kit when you go to set your front in play. This will actually fit behind the washer for the pump assembly as well. It's a little loose behind it, you can see right here, but it works. This thing isn't rotating around or nothing like that, and it won't get in the way of anything. But you can use this behind your factory thrust washer. They do make these thrust washers in different sizes and stuff, but unless you have, they're numbered. Unless you have a bunch of them, sometimes it's easier to just do the shim deal. And because these things are, I think they're 30 thousandths a piece separate. And shoot, these things come, I think the slowest one is an 8 thousandths. So it's pretty easy to get your shim in play where you want it to be. So after you flat sand everything, we got the bell cut off of it. Everything in the case wise is good. Get that bushing stuck up about 60, 70 thousandths. The only other thing to do is this is, like I said, a trans brake kit. Comes with a solenoid and your valve assembly. You want to take your valve assembly and slide it into your modulator opening and use a pair of pliers and just kind of slide it in there and work that thing inside that bore. I've already done mine, but work it inside that bore to make sure that it's free. It goes all the way back to the inside where it bottoms out. Blow it out, stroke it 5 or 6 times, blow it out, and then make sure it's just free, because these valves anywhere from a tenth of a thousandths bigger to 5/10 of a thousandths bigger. So you want to, they put them a little bigger just so that cleans the bore up and makes them fit nice and tight in that bore. So you just want to, before you put this thing together, you want to slide your valves in there and kind of rough that bore in, blow it out, rough it in, blow it out. And this thing will kind of seat itself in there and make its own way. It's not bad. You ain't got to grind it in there. You just take a pair of pliers and just rotate it in. Rotate it as you're putting it in, and you'll feel it, and it'll smooth right out. So you want to do that. Your rear bushing, flat sand it, and then the case is basically ready to put together. We'll set this aside for now. We'll start at the back. Start at the back of the transmission and work our way forward. Then we'll assemble everything. Your output shaft. Most output shafts come with an O-ring, a little bridge here and an O-ring, and then a little bridge to hold the O-ring, and then it goes down like this. The yoke, when the yoke goes on, there's a void in the back and the bottom of the yoke. It fits over that yoke O-ring. Some of the aftermarket yokes and stuff do not take that recess to fit over that O-ring. They'll go down in here, and when they come out the bottom of the spline, they'll hit that bridge for that O-ring and they'll stop. And the drive shaft is stuck right there. It won't go any further. And you may have 2 inches more travel on the inside of your yoke, and it's just not going to get past that bridge. So what we do, I just stick it in a lathe, mill that off. You can take a grinder, you can do anything. If you notice, this thing is, I milled the O-ring bridge and O-ring off of it, and then I just take a grinder and taper it down here to this is where the speedometer gear would normally go, the plastic gear. We're not going to run the speedometer gear in it. And this is the governor, where the governor rides on, which is not having a governor in it either. But I just kind of taper it. Come here where the bottom bridge of that O-ring was, and I just kind of taper it down to the bottom. That's all I do. And it gives you another 3/4 of an inch for that yoke to slide in and not hit. It'll actually go further. It'll go down, shoot, about 1.5 inches because of all that gone. Just something to look at. You know, you buy these expensive yokes and you don't really, they don't fit all the way in there, and they'll tell you when you call them up, oh, take the end of your yoke and cut it off. It's okay, but then you're not sure where your yoke finishes up at. You know, it may be, you may lose some spline area with it. And it's not a bad deal. You got plenty of spline, but then you're not going down into the bushing far enough. You know, this thing sits in there like that. You only got so much bushing. You only got about 1.25 inches, 1 3/8 of bushing. So you want to make sure that yoke is on the other side of that bushing, through that bushing good, so you got nice support right there. The other thing that you need to do on your output shaft, you'll notice right here, there's a lube hole in the back of the output shaft. Take that lube hole and take your die grinder and just grind a little groove in it, turn the corner, and then grind another little groove in the corner. Is because now you don't have a bearing, you don't have a governor back here. The governor's leaking oil and everything, and it's helping to lube the original thrust washer, and it's helping to keep this wet back here, so it keeps that bushing in the back a little bit wet. So what we're going to do is that lube hole, as the lube comes out of it, we're going to send some of it back up front, just to make sure we got enough lube to keep this bearing lubed up. And a drag car, they'll tell you not to worry about it. It don't run long enough. You got plenty of splash in the back. And it's true. I just do it because I'm in there. I'm doing it. In a case the thing ever does get street driven, you know how you want to go to a car show or this, that, and the other. It's just something that you don't have to worry about. Do it while you're in there. Other than the planetary system, there's plenty of stuff online. It shows you where the washers are and stuff like that, so I'm not going to get into too much of that. Low reverse sprag, that's in the part of the planetary system. Just make sure your little springs, when you take this thing out of your sprag, these little rotors will pop out. Just make sure these little springs aren't broken in half. Some of them will break in half over time, and everything is encased right there. It'll stay together until you take it out, and then everything, the rollers will fall. Rollers fall out, period. But when they do fall out, look at these little springs and look at each one of them, and you'll see when you have one that's broken. It's pretty easy to find. The center support, pretty basic. Pull the piston out. There's 2 lip seals on it. Put it back together. Teflon seals. If you notice, we're putting 4 seals on it. We're not doing the third delete for a dual feed. You're putting an aftermarket valve body. 99.9% of the valve bodies, aftermarket valve bodies, manual valve bodies, are dual feed valve bodies to begin with. You don't have to do the dual feed modification. This is where the low reverse sprag rides on. Just make sure that race looks good, nice and smooth, isn't pitted or nothing stupid. The last thing is this is where the low reverse sprag sits in this front planetary system. This is where the band rides for your low reverse band, the big band in the back of the case. These things come grooved, a finish. Don't worry about that. As long as it's nice and smooth, no high spots. I do take some Scotch-Brite and just kind of hit it with some Scotch-Brite to make sure it's flat. But these grooves, you're not going to get rid of it. They're in there for a purpose to help get the fluid away from the band. As long as you're good, that's the way they're supposed to look. Okay? Do not cut this thing. Some guys will take this drum and try and skim it with the lathe to true it or make it smoother. You're going to run into trouble if you do that most of the time, because then you're going to knock the diameter down of this band or this drum, and this band only has so much squeeze in it, and when you get that drum too small, you're going to lose clamping capacity with this band when you do that. From the center support forward, you're going to have two drums. You've got the forward drum, which has the shaft on it. Then you've got the direct drum, which is the sprag assembly for the intermediate clutches. The clutches go into the case, and that's where it's splined there. The drum sits like this. Clutches sit like this. And then your forward drum goes on top of it, like this, and then the pump goes on. Sprag assembly. Everybody talks about, oh, it's got to have the big sprag, it's got to have the big sprag, this, that, and the other. It does need to have the bigger sprag. Factory 400 brake, or 400, the factory 400 drum comes with a spring and roller like the low reverse sprag. It's an aluminum looking assembly, and there's only 9 rollers. So it's pretty low holding capacity. And they do brake, they'll tear the rollers up, they'll do a lot of stuff, but it's easily overpowered, the spring and roller sprag assembly. Easily done. So what do? You put the 34 element sprag in it. These don't have a spring and roller. These are a dog leg type sprag. And when they go in there, they'll twist a little bit like this, and it lets the race rotate one way and it locks the other. There's 34 of them. There is a 36 element and a 38 element. The 38 requires a different drum assembly. The 34 and 36 are pretty common. This is actually a 36. So, how to get this? Just go out, order off the internet or your part supplier, get a 4L80E drum, direct drum. It has the 4L80E, is a same dimension drum, same spline, same everything. It has the big sprag in it. It has a heavier race, heavy duty race in it, and it's a direct fit. So that's what you do. And then you order your sprag assembly, put a new sprag, if you're doing it from fresh, put a new sprag in every one of them. Once you put a new sprag in it, this thing will last you, it'll last you 600 runs, 700, 800 runs. So you won't have to worry about it. Scotch-Brite the bore, that's where the Teflon seals fit inside. A 4L80E drum will have a couple of different pistons in it. This is a molded rubber piston. It's a steel piston, and the rubber is not a lip seal like you would normally see in a regular piston. The lip seal is molded onto the piston itself. Don't use these pistons. Try not to use these pistons. I have seen extreme cases where the pressure inside tries to pull that lip up and separate, or the oil will get underneath this mold. The oil will get underneath this molded part and try to tear it up and put bubbles in it and stuff like that. We just get away from them. Just take your and another reason why is because the return spring pack has a double retainer. It has a top retainer and a bottom retainer on that piston. These are a bear to get those new springs in. You're going to have to change the springs in this deal too, and your trans brake kit will come with new springs for your direct drum. They're a lot stiffer spring, and they're a bear to get into this deal. It's possible, but they are a bear, and we just don't worry about using that. We go back to your 400 piston. Your 400 piston is going to be one of two pistons. It's going to be a steel piston like this, which takes a lip seal, inner and outer. This ain't the lip seal, but it's just to show you. Just an inner, this is the outer one, this is the inner one, and then in the drum is going to have a third one, the middle one. You want to leave the middle lip seal out of the drum. Right there, this is where this one goes. You're going to be, when you take this thing apart, there's going to be a lip seal in here. One on outside of the piston, inside of the piston, and then one on the drum. Take the one in the drum and leave it out. Your direct and your forward drum. Leave the center one out. That's part of your dual feed kit. When you do the modification, you can dual feed it, Like I said, the valve bodies come dual feed, but this is an added benefit. Just go ahead and leave these out. And if you put a stock valve body in it later, you can leave it doesn't matter. You can leave that out as well. It will work. Now, clutch clearances. Like I said, this thing's going to come with new springs, real stiff. And if you do not have a foot press, just take you a bolt, put you a flat plate on the one side, put you a couple of pieces of tubing on this side, bolt this thing down, then you can get that plate off and get your snap ring out of there and change your springs. It's a real easy at-home deal to do. You don't require any special tools or foot brake. Now, clutch clearances. Anywhere from 10 to 15 thousandths per clutch is the range or the norm. So you've got 5 clutch drum, should be anywhere from 50 to 75 thousandths. This particular drum, when I set it up, came out to about 88 to 90 thousandths clearance. So we need to tighten it up a little bit. We're going to use the thicker, we're going to use the red clutches, which is a factory thickness, and then we're going to use a factory GM steel. 92 thousandths, very good steels. You can put a choline steel in it, it doesn't matter. But if you're going to use a regular steel, try to stay with the factory GM steels. If you take your thing apart and the steel plate looks like brand new, nice and smooth, leave it alone. Don't Scotch-Brite it, don't do leave it nice and smooth and leave it alone. And you'll see, if you ever get an aftermarket steel, pick it up and then you pick up one of these, you'll notice the difference right off the bat. The quality of them is just so much better. And they're still out there, they're not too bad to find. TranStar kits come with a pretty good steel as well. They're not as good as the factory GM stuff, but the TranStar stuff is very, very close, and you can use that. TranStar also has the red clutches. I get everything through TranStar. You can also use WIT and some of the other places, and there's a bunch of stuff online. But just be careful what steels you get in the red clutches. This is an Alto red clutch, high performance clutch. You can use a Robestus, Alto, and a BorgWarner, which is the same as a Robestus. But try to stay with the reds. It's a pretty good deal. Now, back to the deal. We need to tighten this thing up a little bit. We got about 88 thousandths of clearance in our clutch pack. We need to tighten it up. And you can you can check your clutch pack with just feeler gauge and slide them up underneath there, or you can put a dial indicator set up on it and do it that way. But a trick, because you're not buying all these different snap rings, thickness snap rings, and different thickness steels and all this stuff, because you're doing your transmission. You're not doing 400 of these things. And you don't want to go out and buy $500 worth of steels and snap rings and everything else to do your transmission. And this is a little trick. On this piston, when you take this piston out and flip it over, there's going to be these little dimples. And you can see, I'll show you that. You can see where these dimples are factory dimpled from the factory. What it does is they dimple these pistons to pick this piston up off the floor of the drum. And why? Because we want to pick it up and have a little bit of space in there for the fluid to go in and push the air out of it, and to get the fluid around the piston to pick it up. The tighter this thing is against the floor of that drum, you don't have any leverage on it. You don't have any fluid in there to push this piston up. So that's why they do. They pick this piston up off the drum a little bit to get the fluid in it. So what you can do is just take your MIG welder and put a little dimple. I don't put them on top of the factory dimple. I go over here between them. The factory has 3 dimples. I go over here and put a little MIG dimple in 3 of them. Take my flapper wheel, hit them flat, come over here and measure how much I dimpled it versus a factory dimple. Measure your factory dimple, then come over here and measure your dimple that you put on, and you can see, okay, I added 20 thousandths to it. Put everything together, and you can put everything together with no lip seals while you're mocking everything up to make it easier. Boom, stick your clutches up there, measure your clearance again. You're going to be right back where you are. You're going to be your 20 thousandths more dimple than your factory dimple is. You're going to be, instead of 98, now you're going to be 78. And you can go in and tighten them up a little bit more. This drum is set up at 70 thousandths, which is about where I like to run a 5-disc red clutch, is about 70 thousandths. Forward drum, you can run tight. You can run down to 40 thousandths on the forward, because that drum comes on all the time. You don't want it tighter than 40, because then when you put it in reverse and back up, you'll feel it a little weird, and that's because that clutch is a little tight, and it's trying to, that clutch is supposed to be off when you're backing up, and it's dragging just a little bit. But stay above 40. 40 to 60 on your forward drum is good. Same thing. It's going to have a steel piston in it or an aluminum piston. If it's an aluminum piston, just take a TIG welder and boop, do the same thing. Put a dimple in it and set your clearance. That's easier than buying all these different steels and the snap rings and 400 different sizes and losing half of them, and now you got $500 in snap rings and stuff that you'll never see again or never use again. Hopefully you'll never have to use again. So that's just a quick, easy way of adding a little bit. Now, what's the maximum here? You don't want to space this thing up more than about 40 thousandths. If you need more than 40 thousandths, then you need to start looking at steels. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. Your forward steels are smaller. The directs are 92 thousandths, and your forwards 78. Yeah, 78 is your forward. So once you do your initial end plate check, you'll know how much you need to take out. If you need to put a 78 in it, that's probably unusual, but I have seen it, but it is unusual to have to put a 78. All you want to do is put it at the very bottom of your clutch pack, and then put your first steel right on top of it, like that. If you need less than 78, the forward clutch has a wave plate in the bottom of the pack. The first steel on a forward is a wave. It's called a wave. And they're pretty small. They're 62 thousandths. And yes, they do have a little bit of a wave in them to help cushion the engagement when you put it in gear. Well, guys, you could put this in your direct drum to take up that little bit of room in here if you need to be. That wave, you're never going to feel or have any side effects of that wave being in there. This thing's got, 80 to 100 pounds of factory line pressure, and you're going to be up around 185 or higher. You'll never feel anything different. So that's a little trick. And like I said, when you order it, you can find these things online or whatever, and it's just a forward wave steel that goes in the very bottom of the wave pack, or goes in the very bottom of a forward clutch pack. It's the wave, it's 62. So gives you an idea. If you need to go less than 62, then the option is to dimple the back of your piston. That way you're not buying 400,000 steels and so forth and so on. Now, let's say you put it all together. Oh, it's tight. Take it apart, make sure steel goes first. Steel, friction, steel, friction, steel, friction. Friction on the very top, and then your pressure plate on the top. Okay? You put this thing together and it's too tight. You got 30 thousandths of clearance. Oh, now I need to figure out what I'm going to do. I need to loosen this thing up a little bit. On these steel pistons, this little ring comes off, and there's different size rings for different clutch packs. A four clutch drum has a different size. There is a 3 clutch drum, like some of the Cadillac stuff, and then there's a 5. You can take this, you need to gain a little bit of room. As crazy as it sounds, you can take your flapper disc, measure it, and just work your flapper disc around there and keep measuring, and take 10 thousandths off of it. Take 20 thousandths off of it. And that'll get you where you need to be. You don't want to go more than about 30, because then it gets the first steel down too far, and it'll want to fall out of your little notches here in your drum. So, but you need 10, 20 thousandths of clearance. You can flapper this down, measure it, just keep measuring it. It ain't got to be precise, but take your time and you can get it very, very close. And it works, okay? And when you do it, put your side that you flap down or ground on, put it towards the piston like this, and leave the factory side up against the steel plate, just so it takes a little bit of that variance away and doesn't affect anything. And you'll be fine. Last thing on the direct drum is you're going to have to drill a hole in it for a constant bleed. Okay? And when you drill your hole, it tells you how to drill your hole, tells you what size. You know, we're about 76 on this one. With your piston and everything out, you just come over here. Here's your factory check ball bleed from the factory. Just come over here 180 from it with your piston out. You want to drill it at about this angle, right there in the very corner. Drill at that angle, comes out at that angle. And of course, deburr it just a touch. You see where I hit it with the flapper wheel and just deburred it. Okay. And what I did here is I just dimpled, took a little punch and dimpled around that hole a little bit because I had to squeeze it tight just a little bit. My drill, when I was actually drilling this thing, my drill broke at the very end, and it went through, but it broke. Got it all back apart, cleaned it up, and then when I went to check it, it was a little loose. It was like 82, and I didn't want it that loose. So you just take your punch and dimple it, and it'll close that hole up a little bit, and you can run your drill bit back through there by hand and get it back where you want it to be. Anywhere from 70 to 80 is about where you want to be at on a trans brake. Like I said, and that's the direct drum. And basically, that's all you got to do on the direct drum. 4L80E, Scotch-Brite your bore, leave your center lip seal out, new sprag, either spiral ring or just buzz the snap ring, and then set your clutch clearances. Forward drum, nothing special about the forward drum. Nothing you need to do here other than check the splines, your input shaft, make sure it's nice and tight. Look at your input shaft where it goes through the drum, make sure it's not trying to turn inside there or something stupid. Clutch clearance 40 to 60. There is the little wave goes in the very bottom, and set it up. Now, the forward clutch hub, that's one everybody talks about on the internet and everything else. This is what it looks like. They do make a billet. They make an aluminum billet. They make a steel billet, and they make a cast billet, or a cast steel one. When you order your drum for your 4L80E, order you a forward hub for a 4L80E as well. When you get it, feel the weight, feel your factory one, you'll see the difference right off the bat. Nothing special. I've got these things in 1,000 horsepower stuff, never broke one, ever. So, is there a place for the other ones? Yes. I think anything above 1,000 horsepower, you need to put a billet one in, you know. But at that point, you also need to probably put an input shaft in it as well. There's a couple of other things that you need to do. This isn't that transmission. We're looking at 800 up to 1,000. So 4L80E is sufficient enough, and then 4L80E drum. Last thing is pump. You want to split your pump, knock your bushing out, butt your seal out, look at your gears. Make sure your gears are all in good shape. Put your gear in, make sure Try to rock it back and forth. Look at your crescent. This is your crescent. Make sure the gear hasn't been trying to run into the crescent. And just feel the pump. You'll feel it. If there's a bad spot in it, a lip on the edge, anything like that, you'll feel it. And then just look at the edge of the gear. They're going to have a little bit of marking on them. That's normal. Can't grab it with your fingernail. Nice and smooth. I also flat sand these together, both sides, and flat sand both sides of the pump halves. Knock your new bushing in. There is a drain hole right here. 90% of the time that drain hole is big enough. You don't have to worry about it, but you do want to check it. They sell these long drill bits that you can drill them with if you need to. I go about 156 thousandths, but if it's 1/4 inch, 125, I mean 1/8 inch, 125, that's fine too. No big deal on that. It comes out over here on this void. So it's just one way right there. You don't have to drill back the other way. It's just one way in. Like I said, just look at it, blow it out, make sure there's no crud and stuff in it. Knock your new bushing in. Your new bushing goes flush with the outside right here, so you don't need a fancy bushing driver. Just something flat that'll fit down in here and knock it down. I do put just a little bit of Loctite on the outside and knock it in. I do also put a little bit of Loctite on my outside seal and knock my seal in. Trick or something to think about when you're doing your seals. Assembly lube, Vaseline is fine. Your seals, you know how the seals are, guys. They have a little spring inside of them. You roll that lip over and you'll see that spring. Before you go knocking these seals in, take your Vaseline and do that. Put some Vaseline inside that deal to keep that spiral, that little spring from coming out from behind that seal. Sometimes knocking these things in, bouncing it, or just but sometimes just knocking this seal in, bouncing it, will accidentally knock that little spiral ring out of the seal. Sometimes you'll catch it, sometimes you won't. But I do that on every seal I put in. It helps to give you a little bit of lube when it initial, and it keeps that spiral ring from popping out. The stator of the pump, pressure regulator valve. Here's where your washer goes. These things come in different sizes to set your in place, but like I said, your shim kit for your rear output will also fit this as well. Okay, so you can shim it up there. And like I said, it's a little loose on there. Don't worry about it. Never gonna know it. The shim goes in first, and then your washer goes on top of it. Okay, same thing, Teflon rings. Same thing, Teflon rings. Now, one modification that everybody talks about and you should look at is your converter charge. Basically, it runs off of line pressure. It takes line pressure and charges the converter. Keeps the converter full. Well, when you start building a bunch of line pressure, you're sending more pressure in that torque converter as well. And remember how they talk about converter charge, pushing the converter, pushing on the crankshaft, tearing the thrust bearing up and stuff? That's why, especially when you start getting above 200 pounds of line pressure, it really starts charging the converter, and you got to do something about it. That's the orifice right there. You can see a little plug that I put in. These plugs are pretty common. And if you're going to go, this transmission, we're going to try and set it up for about 185 pounds. So I do put a little bit of an orifice in it. Factory, they're pretty big. And what I use is a little cut plug that goes in a 700R4 case. You can use anything in there you want. This is the little cut plug that goes in a 700R case. I'll try and put the part number in there. But I drill it out, knock my little cut plug in there, and then drill the cut plug out. That way it's changeable. You can, if you want to open it up, you can open it up. You want to make it smaller, you can make it smaller. But that's what I do. This one, 156. Yeah, I'm about 160. Yeah, I'm about 168 to 170. And that's, if you kind of just remember that, 185 line pressure, and 180 as far as the orifice goes for the converter charge. Gets you somewhere in the ballpark where everything is happy. So, and most of your stuff, 185 line pressure is good. You get something that's making 1,000 horsepower, and you're on your limit of your 400. You may have to bump it up to about 200, 210. So just keep that in mind. But just look at your stator. Your stator tube presses in. Just make sure it looks good there. It's got very fine little teeth. Just make sure everything looks good. Pressure regulator. Pressure regulator, normally, they're going to send you a spring in your trans brake kit. When you take it apart, you're going to have a horseshoe washer. That's the horseshoe washer they talk about. You've got a little spring retainer, and then the spring sets on it like that. Okay? Even with the spring they send you, add a 3/8 washer to the very bottom. Put your horseshoe on, and then your spring retainer on top. And that's going to give you about 185 right there. Okay? And that's what this is a reverse manual valve body trans brake sportsman version. Okay? There's a pro version and a sportsman version. Sportsman version is when you put this thing in reverse position, put your shifter in reverse position, you do not have to push the trans brake to back up. It'll back up with no trans brake. So your foot brake guys that aren't allowed a trans brake in their class, some of them, sometimes the different tracks will make you unplug your solenoid completely. Well, if you did that, you're not going to have reverse on a pro brake. A pro brake, you put it in neutral or reverse position, and it's not going to back up until you engage the trans brake. So this is a sportsman version. And the reason is we went with a sportsman is because this guy foot brakes everywhere, but he does bracket race every now and then, box class, so he can run a trans brake. So when he does do that, he can plug in his trans brake and leave off the trans brake with a delay box. You don't need a pro brake when you're leaving off a delay box. You're not running off of a pro tree. Pro tree is 4/10 pro tree. Everybody knows what that is. You leave off, all the bulbs come on at one time, you leave off of it. Yeah, you do need a fast brake in that. Most of the time you need the fastest brake you can get in that, because the car's not necessarily a fast moving car, or you may be like me and 50 something years old and not as fast as you used to be. But this is getting a sportsman brake. We're going to leave the trans solenoid unhooked, and it will have reverse when you put it in the reverse position. Second thing, band. We talked about the low reverse band. The low reverse band comes on when you put the trans brake button on. Remember we talked about the drum having that little bit of lip or machine finish in it? Good. Two different bands you can use. Kevlar band. The Kevlar band is going to be grooved, and it'll say Kevlar on it and everything else. Good band, works great, no problem. Other band that you can use is a factory GM performance band. Not a 4L80E, it's got to be a 400 because the lugs are different. But a factory GM performance band, you can find them. How do you know? Because they're dark colored and they're smooth. There's no groove in them whatsoever. The Kevlar bands are grooved. I don't know why they didn't make them flat. I don't know, but they are grooved. And they're a good band, don't get me wrong. But whenever I can, I try to use the smooth band. I just had better luck with them. And grooved, meaning this is the groove band. You can see the lines on them. And that's a factory 400 band. And your Kevlar band is going to look like that, except it's going to be a lighter color, and it'll say Kevlar written in the lining. And last thing before we start assembly is Teflon rings. Remember I was talking about the rings for the center support, rings for the pump, and you read on the internet, oh, you got to use Teflon rings. Yeah, you got to use Teflon rings. It comes with cast iron rings. The cast iron rings, when you start putting a lot of line pressure in them, wear out very, very quickly. And they also want to ring groove the drums that they're going in. So you want to put a Teflon ring in it. There are Teflon ring kits out there. So they're pretty easily available, pretty cheap. Four goes on the center support, 2 goes on the pump. But first, take your factory steel and thrust washer that was in the back of the case. Mine's 145. So 145 is a start, but I can tell you normally I go up 10 thousandths right off the bat. So we're going to go take your bearing and your shim kit, figure out your shim kit to come out to 155. Like I said, shim goes down, bearing goes on top of it inside the case. Vice grip on it, up, put the little mark, as that way when you're setting it down in there, you know where your line up for your little boat is. Leave the band off of it and go from there. My planetary system in, my snap ring in, center support in, like I was showing you, set it down in there. What I do is I just take and flip it upside down. Grant you, I don't have a bell on this one, but I do just flip it upside down. Easiest way to do it is if you got a dial indicator with a vice grip deal, you can clamp it on here and put it on. If you've got a magnetic base, just put a bolt piece of metal right here and run a magnetic base on it. Put vice grip on it and just click, 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 right there. And I think I said 20 thousandths before. That's factory is 20. On these, I run anywhere from, honestly, from about 5 thousandths to, I like 5 to 8. I will go sometimes at 15 if it comes out to 15, but I try not to go over 15. I try 5 to 8. I just measured this one and it's right at 9. So nice and smooth. So we're good there. set our end plate, pulled everything back out, put our low reverse band back in, put that small snap ring, fits down in that case where the center support sits on top of it, and then the beveled spring goes on top of that center support. When you're putting that center support down in, you'll remember your little hole is right here for your center support bolt. It's a 3/8 drive, and you're going to have a chrome pretty thin wall socket to get in that spot right there to get that in. So when you get this thing down in there, before you pop your snap ring on it, just make sure your center support bolt is going in. You didn't miss the mark there. And screw it in. I don't tighten it up. I just kind of leave it loose for now. Snap ring in, and you're good to go. Back to the pump. We're just going to assemble the pump real quick. I got my bushing knocked in, my seal knocked in. Pump gears, plenty. I use a trans gel, but you can use Vaseline. Same thing. When your pump gears go in, look at your pump gear. This thing, the hatch, the little notches go up. If you flip around the other way, the notches are further down in the bore, and they don't go like that. They go out. In case you missed it when you tore it apart, but they do go out. I take my extension housing, set my pump on it, line up my feed hose right here towards me, grab my stator. These are my feed hose towards me, and that's how I put it on. And there's 5 specific bolts just for the pump. When you take this thing apart, you should probably lay them aside, that way you don't get them mixed up. There's going to be a long, 2 shorts, and 2 mediums. I get them started, and then I have a Home Depot special, a couple of 8-inch, I think they're 6-inch or 8-inch hose clamps. Run them together, and that's all I use. Make sure you don't have an O-ring on here. I take and Scotch-Brite the edge of it just to knock any dirt off of it. Slide your hose clamp around. There. I hear that little, that's just the top. I just kind of center it a little bit right there. Tighten my clamp up. And we're done. All you gotta do is tighten your bolts down. Okay, I got my pump together, pressure regulator in, everything done. I already put my O-ring on it and so forth because I already stuck this thing together, checked my end play, had to adjust it. I had to put a 15,000 shim underneath here to get my 10, and check my intermediate clutch pack clearance. I'm about 30, 35, which is good. Anywhere below 50, you know, anywhere 30 to 50 probably on the intermediate. This intermediate clutch pack has 3 frictions, which is a standard 400. Like I said, a 3 friction intermediate with the big sprag, they're good for 800 to 1,000 horsepower. You know, you can, if you want to, you could put a 4L80E clutch pack in it, which the steels are different thicknesses, they're the same lug, and then the pressure plate on the top is going to be a different looking pressure plate for the top, but it'll be 4 frictions instead of 3. So when you order your frictions, if you're going to go that route, then make sure you get 4 frictions instead of the 3 frictions. But 3 frictions, look how big these things are. They're freaking huge, you know. Good for 800 to 1,000. So, and with the 4L80E drum, with a little bit wider spline for the intermediate clutch, you can put 4 on it without any trouble. With a 400 race, you got to be careful about trying to stack 4 on it. And I say 400 because some of the early 400 drums have this style sprag, but they're very hard to find. They're very few. Most likely they're going to have the spring and roller like this one had in it, and you'll go to a 4L80E drum. But if you did have the early drum and it had that sprag, you could just buy a good late sprag and put the late sprag assembly in it and be fine with it. So intermediate clutch, already had it in, you know. Same thing, you're going to have a little bit thinner steel for your intermediate clutch pack, small, 2 thicks, and then the pressure plate, the small one goes down first. And then friction steel. I don't necessarily soak my clutches, but on my final assembly, I take transmission fluid and a brush and brush them. Okay. Now, the direct drum, I take the clutch pack out of it. That way I can grab a hold of the spring pack right here with my hand, set it down in there, and just kind of rotate it back and forth, and it'll go all the way down. Just like that. How do you know it falls all the way down? And to help you get it all the way down if you need to be, you can take a little compressed air. Remember your hole right here where your bolt, your center support bolt is in it? That's also the feed for the intermediate clutch, that clutch pack. So you can hear the clutch come on. Got the clutch on, you'll be able to spin the drum one way and it locks the other because you're in that spline. But if you want to make sure that it's all the way in, apply the clutch. If the drum moves up or moves a little bit up, it's not all the way in. It's not in that last clutch. So keep rotating it, and you can actually take and kind of give it a little bit of air and rotate it at the same time, and it'll pop in that last time. Same thing. For your direct, 5 frictions, 5 steels. Steel goes in first. Friction steel, friction steel, friction steel. I like to set my clutches up dry. It's just something I've always done and kind of a little bit more consistent. Sometimes when you soak your clutches and you don't hang them up and let them dry overnight, when you go to set your clutch clearances, it just makes it kind of inconsistent. You take it in and out, trying to adjust it, and it keeps moving more than what you're adjusting it for, and it's because this thing is so drippy wet with fluid off of them, you're not getting a good reading. So I try to do my clutches all dry, and then when I assemble it for the last time, I'll brush my clutches with training fluid and it works. Everything works. So, direct drums in, all the way down, clutches are in, snap rings on, we're good to go. Our forward drum is already assembled. Nothing special other than the forward hub. The hub does have washers on both sides of it, so make sure and get Vaseline your washers on. The hardened hub, the center, use your outer lip seal, inner lip seal, leave your middle lip seal off like the direct drum. And that's what it looks like when you get ready to put it in, okay? Put it on. Keep doing it and it'll pop all the way down. How do you know it's all the way down? Where the two drums meet, right there, you'll feel it, reach down there, you can actually feel it with your finger. They're gonna be freaking probably no more than about 70 thousandths apart. You can't get your finger, you can't quite get your fingernail in it or anything like that. See, my pick won't even go away. It'll start and then rotate the drum over. So they're basically pretty close together right there. The intermediate band that you probably had, or you should have had when you took the thing apart, that goes around the direct drum, that little small band here, you're not going to use it. No intermediate band goes back in it with a reverse manual valve body. Manual valve body. Okay? Like I said, I've already set everything. Our forward drum is in, my pump is done. And you can see right here, there's where a bunch of the feed hose are. There's the suction hose for the pressure regulator, but here's where all your feed, they go in the bottom of the case. So just kind of remember that when you're putting this thing in. Feed hose right here, bottom of the case right here, and go down. Then that way, kind of line it up. Poop. Push it down. And then you can set your in play. There's a little hole right there. You can take and move it with a pick. After you kind of run a couple of bolts in this, and then you can check your in play there. Like I said, I'm about 10, 12 right there. So there we are, assembled. Input shaft should turn nice and free. Don't worry about all the noise in there, you're fine. Should be able to still put it in park and still turn the input shaft. It just locks the output. It's gonna rotate both ways. It's not gonna rotate one and lock the other, unlike some transmissions. I hope this was helpful. And a lot of the guys don't realize the trick about picking the piston up off the drum. It does a couple of things. It gets some fluid underneath that drum to help. It's hydraulics, you get the more volume of fluid underneath there, the more pressure you have behind that piston, and then it takes up the clutch clearance that you need to get your clutch pack correct. So I know it was a little bit of a long video, but like and subscribe, and remember, like I said, you can do that on just about any transmission as far as the drum trick goes, and we'll probably post one up on the C4 and maybe one on the Glide, the Power Glide as well. We'll try to make them shorter next time, and thanks. Like I said, like and subscribe.